look at transport of oxygen, we have already seen that actually oxygen is carried by the red blood cells. So we want to see how exactly this happens, and we start with this scenario. One, we are having a table, and that table is illustrating the extent to which blood is actually saturated with oxygen, and this is happening because these samples are collected from athletes whose blood has been collected after an intense exercise, where they actually require a lot of oxygen being delivered to their tissues. And then we are measuring, checking for the percentage saturation with oxygen for the arteries, and also for the blood in the arteries, and also for the blood in the veins. Okay, so we want to look at the concentration of oxygen before the race and after the race. Okay, what could you expect in normal situations? Even before we look at the questions, we could expect that when someone is engaged in an intense activity, their body is respiring at a high rate to make sure that they have the energy that is required to do this exercise. So you could expect that because of this respiration, you have increase in carbon dioxide, okay? But also you have an increase in the need for more oxygen also actually increases. So what delivers this oxygen? Definitely it has to be the arteries. But then when this blood returns back to the heart, you could expect that much of the oxygen has been picked, and you have less oxygen in that venous blood that returns to the heart. And this is typically what we are actually saying, that the venous blood is having less oxygen compared to arterial blood. That definitely is an implication that oxygen has been used. But looks like before the exercise, the blood that was returning back to the heart, the venous blood had more oxygen compared to when the exercise is done, where you have 25% oxygen in this blood. So that's an issue there. That explains that oxygen has been used, and that's why we have less there. But before and after, you can say that the percentage saturation is actually the same. So the questions are, what is oxygen saturation? What does that mean in this context? Can this data actually explain how oxygen delivery to the tissues changes during intense exercise, and describe the structure of hemoglobin and how it is loaded with oxygen and how it is unloaded? How oxygen is unloaded efficiently, and can you suggest why hemoglobin releases more oxygen in active tissues such as the muscles during the exercise? Okay, so these questions are sufficient for us to be able to go through these slides. So transport of oxygen. Oxygen is transported by red blood cells. So these red blood cells flow in blood, right? As the blood is delivered to the tissues, you will have the oxygen getting out of the red blood cells and diffusing into the respiring tissues. But that is not to mean that you don't have some oxygen that is contained in the blood plasma. Actually, a percentage is dissolved in this plasma, and that is why we are saying that 0.3 mils of oxygen can be dissolved per 100 mils of blood. So that is a little percentage, but we really need to acknowledge that it actually exists, and the main role of the red blood cells is actually to deliver this oxygen. Okay, so that is why the plasma delivering this small percentage of oxygen is not sufficient. We need to have cells called the red blood cells to carry this oxygen because of the different adaptations that we already looked at. The heart definitely plays an important role in the delivery of oxygen. That's why we have that image there. The heart pumps blood. If the heart does not work, then you cannot have oxygen being delivered to the tissues that need it. Okay, so small percentage, 2% of the blood of oxygen is dissolved in plasma, and therefore it is not sufficient for the tissues to rely on that. So the tissues rely on oxygen that is delivered by the red blood cells. Okay, so hemoglobin, which is the red pigment in red blood cells, is the one that combines with oxygen, therefore plays an important role in carrying it. Similarly, it also carries carbon dioxide. Okay, so the usual point is that when cells are respiring, that is, they break down, let us say, glucose, okay, to produce energy. They need oxygen, such that respiration is aerobic. And if there is no sufficient oxygen, respiration will be anaerobic and usually produces less energy. But additionally, there is a problem of producing lactic acid. So humans could actually want to have what we term as aerobic respiration. So oxygen is needed for that purpose. However, the process of this respiration will definitely produce carbon dioxide. This carbon dioxide also needs to be carried, and then it is exhaled such that it doesn't build up, because when it builds up, it causes acidity, and this acidity will alter the internal environment for action of certain enzymes that are sensitive to pH changes. So you don't want to be in such a situation. So that's why you have that illustration there, that this gaseous exchange where oxygen is picked, it is in the alveoli in the lungs. Those are the gaseous exchange surfaces or respiratory surfaces in humans, the alveoli. So in the alveoli, you will have the air that has been breathed in getting into the red blood cells, and then the carbon dioxide will diffuse out, and it is what we breathe out, and that is the illustration there. A protein called hemoglobin is the one that attaches that is the one that oxygen attaches to. Okay, so it's a protein. What does it contain? It has two polypeptide chains, the alpha and beta chains. Okay, so 2 beta, 2 alpha polypeptide chains. So we have a total of 4 polypeptide chains. So each of this chain is actually having an iron atom. Okay, so this iron atom is what we term as the prothetic group in hemoglobin. A prothetic group is a non-proteinous portion that permanently attaches to a protein. So that is a prothetic group. So we are saying that hemoglobin has a prothetic group, and that prothetic group is the 4 iron atoms, where each iron atom is attaching to one of the 4 polypeptide chains. Okay, so oxygenation is when you have this blood getting this oxygen. It's not about issues to do with the oxidation, where you have, for example, issues to do with losing electrons. No, that's not what we are talking about here. Okay, so the fact that you have that structure of hemoglobin allows it to efficiently bind with oxygen. Okay, so if you have changes in the partial pressure of oxygen, if we want to look at how much oxygen we have, we can look at partial pressures. That is why that P is there. So PO2, that is basically partial pressure for oxygen. And we are saying that changes in the partial pressure for oxygen actually influences hemoglobin's ability to either bind or release oxygen. So that means that where you have a lot of oxygen, okay, higher partial pressures of oxygen, then hemoglobin is not going to release that oxygen. But where you have low partial pressure for oxygen, then you're going to have hemoglobin releasing that oxygen. Okay, so hemoglobin, because it has these 4 pulpita chains, each chain having an iron atom, it can combine up to 4 molecules of oxygen. That formation results into what we call oxyhemoglobin. It is when you have hemoglobin being bound to oxygen. Okay, the process is reversible, and it depends on where these red blood cells are. If they're in respiring tissues, they need to release that oxygen. If it is in the alveoli, then they have to pick up that oxygen. So that's the whole point there. So when you have low oxygen concentration, then you have hemoglobin releasing the oxygen. If you have high oxygen concentration, then the hemoglobin will be picking the oxygen. Okay, so we have seen the equation where we have 4 oxygen molecules binding to 1 hemoglobin molecule. Okay, so we are talking about oxygen, but also similarly, you can have carbon dioxide basically combining with hemoglobin. Okay, so the oxyhemoglobin, it is the hemoglobin that does not have oxygen bound to it. And then, of course, the molecular oxygen that we have just shown there, and the oxyhemoglobin is the one where you have hemoglobin bound to oxygen. Okay, so here we are illustrating that the combination of hemoglobin and oxygen is actually reversible, and that is why oxygen, it can be released or be picked up depending on the oxygen concentration. And usually when we're talking about active tissues or respiring tissues, the oxygen has to be released. And then when you talk about the alveoli, the oxygen has to be picked. Okay, so what we are seeing here also is what we term as oxygen saturation, and we saw this in our scenario. So what do we see in the graph is that when you have low partial pressures of oxygen, especially in the tissues, the percentage of the red blood cells that are having oxygen, or basically the percentage of hemoglobin that bound to oxygen, is very low, because in the tissues you want oxygen to go to the tissues, so you don't want to hold on to it. So the hemoglobin does not hold on to the oxygen. But in the lungs, what happens is that you want the hemoglobin to hold on to the what? To hold on to you want the hemoglobin to hold on to the oxygen, and that's why we are saying it is saturated. Okay, so close to 100% there. So in our question, we had an issue to do with saturation. We are basically referring to the percentage of the hemoglobin that is bound to oxygen. Okay, and we are saying it is highest in the lungs, basically at the alveoli, but should be expected to be low in the tissues because you want hemoglobin to release the oxygen. So we go back